Well said. Thank you. The time for convening has arrived, and the Senate will now come to order. At this time, I would like to ask that all unauthorized persons, which is not many, exit the chamber. It is my distinguished honor to recognize the senior, in many ways, senator from the 53rd District.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for your leadership of this great state and going down the right road as always. The moment in time, 1933, Governor Gene Talmadge declared martial law over the state of Georgia. Also, Braves pitcher John Smote set a franchise record for consecutive victories, something you would have achieved if you didn't lose that arm. Is that right? Yeah. Mr. President, the journal has been read and found to be correct.
Is there objection to dispensing with the reading of the journal? The chair hears none, and the reading of the journal is dispensed with. Is there objection to the confirmation of the journal? The chair hears none, and the journal is confirmed. All senators who have bills or resolutions, I invite you to bring them to the Secretary's desk at this time. Mr. Secretary, first reading of Senate bills and resolutions, please.
Senate Bill 520 by Senators Rudd of the 33rd, Hinson of the 41st, and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 4 of Chapter 4 of Title 17 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to arrest by private persons.
Judiciary.
Senate Bill 521 by Senators Parent of the 42nd, Hinson of the 41st, and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 21 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to primaries and elections generally.
Ethics.
Senate Bill 522 by Senator Jackson II, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 47 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to the Employees Retirement System of Georgia so as to provide that
retirement.
Senate Bill 523 by Senators Jackson II and Harbison of the 15th, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 24 of Title 33 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to insurance generally so as to require health
insurance and labor
policies. Senate Bill 524 by Senators Parent of the 42nd, Hinson of the 41st, and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 1 of Article 2 of Chapter 2 of Title 21 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to general provisions regarding preparation for and conduct of primaries and elections.
Ethics.
Senate Bill 525 by Senator Harbison of the 15th, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 2 of Title 45 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to general provisions regarding eligibility and qualifications for office.
Public safety.
Senate Bill 526 by Senator Harbison of the 15th, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 10 of Title 17 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to procedure for sentencing and imposition of punishment so as to
Judiciary.
repeal. Senate Bill 527 by Senator Harbison of the 15th, a bill to be entitled an act to authorize the governing authority of the Unified Government of Casita, Chattahoochee County to levy an excise tax pursuant to
state and local
subsection 8.
government.
Senate Resolution 990 by Senators Anderson of the 43rd and others, a resolution creating the Senate Study Committee on creating a respectful and open world for natural hair.
Rules.
Senate Resolution 991 by Senators Harrell of the 40th and others, a resolution creating the Senate Peach Care Public Option Study Committee.
Rules.
That completes the order, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary, first reading of House bills and resolutions, please.
House Bill 1029 by Representative Mathis of the 144th, a bill to be entitled an act to provide that future elections for the office of probate judge of Twiggs County shall be nonpartisan elections.
State and local government.
House Bill 1030 by Representative Mathis of the 144th, a bill to be entitled an act to provide that future elections for the office of Chief Magistrate of the Magistrate Court of Twiggs County shall be nonpartisan elections.
State and local government.
That completes the order, Mr. President.
Secretary will now read reports of standing committees, please.
House Bill 195 by Representative Benton of the 31st Georgia Firefighters Pension Fund, increased benefit amount payable to beneficiaries after the member's death. House Bill 245 by Representative Buckner of the 137th and others, Peace Officers Annuity Fund, requires certain benefits payable to a surviving spouse to terminate if such surviving spouse remarries. Remove a provision. House Bill 463 by Representative Montahan of the 17th and others, motor vehicles, issuance of a Class C driver's license to operators of certain three-wheeled motor vehicles provide. House Bill 487. By Representative Bonner of the 72nd and others, Disaster Volunteer Relief Act, certain employees of state agencies to be granted leave from work with pay in order to participate in specialized disaster relief services authorized. House Bill 555 by Representative Carpenter of the 4th and others, criminal procedure Add public child welfare case manager to the people for whom arrest warrants may be issued only by certain judicial officers. House Bill 576 by Representative Williams, 145th, and others. Courts distribution priority of partial payment of fines, bond forfeitures, and costs provide. House Bill 789 by Representative Newton and the 123rd and others. Insurance, creation of a surprise bill rating system based on the number of certain physician specialty groups contracted with a hospital within a health insurers network provide. House Bill 791, Representative Stevens of the 164th. Pharmacists dispense up to a 90-day supply of a maintenance medication under certain conditions authorized. House Bill 819 by Representative Hitchens of the 161st and others. Motor vehicles, veterans license to any person who is a United States citizen and resident of the state who served in the military for an ally of the United States during a time of war or other conflict, authorized issuance. House Bill 838, Representative Hitchens of the 161st and others. Law enforcement officers and agencies, Office of Public Safety, Officer Support, change the name. House Bill 847 by Representative Corbett of the 174th and others. Hemp farming, definitions, penalties, and criminal background checks provide. House Bill 848 by Representative Blackman of the 146th and others. State government provide a Department of Administrative Services additional options when disposing of surplus property in the best interest of the state. Change certain definitions. House Bill 861 by Representative Wiedauer of the 119th and others. Motor vehicles, commercial carriers, amend certain definitions. House Bill 865 by Representative Scoggins of the 14th and others. Wills, Trust, and Administration of Estates, Revised Probate Code of 1998, revise and update provisions. House Bill 894 by Representative Meeks of the 178th and others. Seed Development Commission, staggered terms of members. House Bill 897 by Representative Burchett of the 176th and others. State Forestry Commission, create a standing timber notification website, require. House Bill 907, Representative Saines of the 180th and others. Military, additional time period of service and the definition of war veteran, include. House Bill 912 by Representative Reeves of the 34th and others. Social Services, authorize foster parents to arrange for short-term babysitting. House Bill 914 by Representative Clark of the 147th and others. Professions and businesses, military spouses licensed in other states to practice certain professions and occupations in this state provide. House Bill 953 by Representative Rich of the 97th and others. Administrative Services Department of certain terms in particular types of state contracts shall be void and unenforceable and should not be included in such agreements provide. House Bill 957 by Representative Jones of the 47th and others. Education, certain charter school employees shall be included in the health insurance funds for public school teachers provide. House Bill 991 by Representative Hatchett of the 150th and others. Healthcare Transparency and Accountability Act, Enact. House Bill 1008 by Representative Campbell of the 171st and others. Buildings and housing, residential industrial building, revise the definition. House Bill 1017 by Representative Laricchia of the 169th and others. Public officers and employees, revised when dependents qualify for a payment of indemnification for death under the Georgia State Indemnification Fund. House Bill 1114 by Representative Cooper of the 43rd and others. Medical assistance, Medicaid coverage for lactation care and services and postpartum care provide. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read reports of standing committees?
Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Governmental Oversight has had under consideration the following legislation and instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Resolution 1300, due pass by committee substitute. House Bill 1122, due pass. House Bill 780, due pass. House Resolution 1094, due pass. With regard to House Resolution 1094, a minority report notice has been filed. Respectfully submitted, Senator Heath of the 31st District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Finance has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 846, due pass by substitute. House Bill 1035, due pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Huffstetler, the 52nd District Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Insurance and Labor has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 167, due pass by substitute. House Bill 758, due pass. House Bill 946, due pass by substitute. House Bill 1050, due pass. House Bill 1094, due pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Jones of the 25th District, Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 984, due pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Stone of the 23rd District, Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Regulated Industries and Utilities has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 244, due pass. House Bill 417, due pass. House Bill 972, due pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Cowsert of the 46th District, Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Special Judiciary has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 903, due pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Jordan of the 6th District, Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on State and Local Government Operations has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 511, due pass. House Bill 802, due pass. House Bill 1075, due pass. House Bill 1117, due pass. House Bill 1118, due pass. House Bill 1157, due pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Anderson of the 24th District, Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Transportation Committee has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Resolution 1163, due pass by substitute. House Bill 1098, due pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Beach of the 21st District, Chair. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and the Environment has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 833, due pass. House Bill 998, due pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Harper of the 7th District, Chair. That completes the order, Mr. President.
The Senate will stand at ease for a few minutes while we wait for additional senators to be able to come to the floor. The Senate will stand at ease for a few minutes. We will continue to stand at ease for a few minutes as we just try to continue to have the caucus meetings break up and folks start to make their way back over here. We'll continue to stand at ease. Thank you. All right, the Senate will come back to order. The Senate will now come back to order. It's now time for our morning roll call. Are there any motions to excuse? And I'm going to take a little bit of time here because I know we're just coming back to order here. Any motions to excuse? Any motions to excuse? All right, the chair sees no motions to excuse. Chair would like to recognize the majority whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent to suspend the roll call.
The majority whip has asked for unanimous consent to dispense with the morning roll call. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and the morning roll call is dispensed with. It is now time for our Pledge of Allegiance and for our morning devotion. I'd ask that all senators please take your seats and cease all audible conversations. And I'd like to ask our doorkeepers to secure the doors. It's my honor to recognize a senator from the 56th District to lead us in our pledge and to introduce our chaplain of the day.
Thank you, Mr. President. Please join me in the pledge to the American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now the Georgia flag. I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag and to the principles for which it stands, wisdom, justice, and moderation. Good morning. It's a very special honor for me this morning to bring a dear friend to be our pastor of the day, Reverend Neville Billy. He is here today with his lovely wife, Donnella Billy. If you'd stand up for a moment, please, so I can see you. We're very thrilled to have them here. They are the co-pastors of Raise His Praise International Ministries, which was founded in the year 2000. They responded to the call of God upon their lives to reach people around the world with a hopeful message of loving God and loving people. They've traveled and ministered individually throughout America, Europe, Canada, all over Africa, multi-level gifting as a conference speaker, a prophet, a singer, musician, and songwriter. Raise His Praise Church in Roswell was subsequently established as a base for international ministries to operate from and to create a loving and caring local church for people from all walks of life to feel welcome and loved. Every Sunday, people from across Metro Atlanta, used to be in person, now a little more virtually, attend a vibrant and contemporary worship service that inspires all those using user-friendly sermons that are easily implemented into the daily routine and applied to real-life challenges, enabling them to experience and enjoy the abundant life that Jesus Christ provides for every human, irrespective of who they are, what they've done in our past, and what they may be struggling with now and in the future. Reverend Billy is a real leader in our community in Roswell. He's the chaplain for the Roswell Police Department. He is the regional coordinator for the annual National Day of Prayer, which we hold every year at the Faces of War Memorial, and I am so honored to participate with him during that program. He's the founding president of the North Atlanta Family Network, the founder of the Business Prayer Network in Roswell. He serves on the Board of Chaplains for the Georgia Chiefs of Police for Roswell, and holds numerous other positions and accolades. Again, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome my friend, Reverend Neville Billy.
Thank you, Senator John Albus. I appreciate that. And good morning to you all, Lieutenant Governor, members of the Senate, and the Secretary of the Senate. I want to thank you all for all you do for our great state of Georgia. It's a real pleasure for me to be a part of this state. I commend you all for continuing this historic tradition of honoring and including wisdom and guidance of our Creator at this year's 2020 legislative session. And that makes me enormously proud to be a Georgian. So pardon me for not bringing my Bible today. Moses was given the first law on a tablet, so I brought my tablet to keep it authentic. at the risk of stating the obvious, you have been elected and trusted with the sacred authority and responsibility to introduce and pass legislation that protects the safety of every citizen in Georgia and promotes a healthy and peaceful place for all of us to live, work, and enjoy life. Legislation provides us with the right to mitigation, deliberation, and arbitration if needed, but none of which can take place without communication. And therein lies our success or failure. And communication, as you know, is a two-way street. And as a fellow public servant, not elected but divinely ordained and appointed, I had to learn this hard lesson that James 1:19 helped me with. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak. Quick to listen, slow to speak. It's not by chance that God has created us with 2 ears and 1 mouth. It's not by chance. So when we look at the role that we play and how these faculties help us, we realize that God is implying here that we should listen twice as much as we speak. But it could appear that we have 2 mouths and 1 ear because we are constantly talking but seldom listening. Even when the other person is speaking, we're not listening as much as we are crafting our rebuttal. If only we would listen more, we won't have to talk as much. It's not by chance that arguments seldom settle our disputes. Could that be because we're talking more than we're listening? Now, note the Bible states everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak. No one is exempt. All of us should employ this communication method. This month of June was 22 years since I immigrated to the United States from Cape Town, South Africa. And ever since, I've looked for ways to give back to the community and serve in several organizations. One as an election official for more than a decade. This past June 9th, election day, one of our elderly poll workers came to work but suddenly realized that she had forgotten her hearing aid at home. Realizing that she would not be able to perform her poll worker duties properly, I allowed her to rush home quickly around the corner to get it. My point is, even when we're hard of hearing, we have hearing aids. We have devices. We have platforms that are available to us to help us. Also, the protruding shape of our ears help extend our hearing capabilities. So in order to listen to others, we sometimes have to extend our hearing. 1 ear on each side of our heads enabled us to hear from both sides, to hear from both sides of the aisle of our Senate chamber, to hear from both sides of our constituent, to hear from both sides of our nation. Just as a sidebar, your role in the Senate is sometimes referred to as the right wing and the left wing. I find that very interesting because we need 2 wings to fly. We cannot fly on a wing and a prayer. We need both wings to soar as a nation. We need both wings to soar as a state. Quick to listen, slow to speak. Now, how many of you have faith that as a nation we're going to get through this difficult time? Many of you do have faith. Well, faith comes by hearing. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So if faith comes by hearing, then our faith is built on the substance of what we hear. It's built on the substance of what we're listening to by the word of God. I've got much to say, but time is limited, and I want to respect that. Before I conclude in prayer, I have one question I'd like you to ask yourself. Am I listening? Am I listening? If you will, please stand with me in prayer. Our Father in heaven, you are the greatest listener who listens to each and every one of our prayers. When we talk to you about our daily struggles and difficulties. So we humbly and respectfully ask you to help us to listen to you and to listen to each other, that we may introduce and execute sound, practical solutions for all of our citizens. As your servant here today, I pronounce and invoke a unique blessing on our governor, our lieutenant governor, each and every one of our senators, and our Secretary of State of the Senate for their pivotal role during this unprecedented time in human history that calls for a deeper understanding and unique skills to discern and distinguish so they can collectively navigate us through this tumultuous and turbulent times with the COVID-19 pandemic, killing almost 120,000 people across our nation, damaging our economy, forcing many businesses to permanently close down, causing 33 million people to lose their jobs. Help us, Senate, to navigate through our nationwide protest for equality. As we commemorate this historic day, Juneteenth, the legal end of slavery, help our Senate commence the beginning of complete freedom for all citizens. Help heal the gaping wound that divides our nation and stitch us back together with a bond of love. Fill the Senate chamber today with your loving presence, and every day with your omniscient wisdom for our Senate to temper the law with justice and balance justice with grace. May this 2020 legislative session be directed with love, understanding, consideration, and cooperation so that all of our citizens will be able to live honorable, affordable, comfortable, enjoyable, and peaceful lives in every city and town throughout the great state of Georgia, under you, our great God. We respectfully and humbly ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
The chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that Rule 4-2.1 be suspended to allow the Senate to third read and consider HB 793, the appropriations bill, at this time.
The majority leader has asked that the rules be suspended for the third reading of House Bill 793, which is our appropriations bill. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and it is so. Chair recognizes the senator from the 19th. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption?
House Bill 793 by Representative Ralston of the 7th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to make and provide appropriation for the state fiscal year beginning July 1, 2020 and ending June 30, 2021. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Appropriations offers the following substitute to House Bill 793, a bill to be entitled an act to make and provide appropriations for the state fiscal year beginning July 1, 2020 and ending June 30, 2021. If I can please the order, Mr. President.
Before I recognize the Appropriations Chairman, I want to take a moment to just once again recognize our great friend that we have unfortunately lost, Senator Jack Hill, and the amazing work he's done for so many years on getting this state prepared and getting this chamber prepared. He is certainly missed. His legacy will last for a long, long time. Also want to take a moment to thank our new Appropriations Chair for stepping into the role and getting us to this point here today. It is my honor to recognize the Appropriations Chairman, the senator from the 19th, to present House Bill 793.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, thank you for your consideration during this time period and for all the help you have given as we have worked through this budget process. I want to thank the members first of the Senate Appropriations Committee. Without your help, we could not have gotten to where we are now. The 11 subcommittee chairs and the over half of the Senate that sits on the Appropriations Committee who spent hours going through line item after line item. Appreciate that. Appreciate the letters you've sent on behalf of your constituents and agencies and communities. And I also want to thank you in advance for the unanimous vote out of committee that you gave in a bipartisan fashion earlier this week. I also need to praise a few other groups. First, our Senate budget staff. You know that this process does not work without their tireless efforts, and some folks across the hall as well. The House Budget Office and the House Appropriations Committee have been outstanding partners in this process. That we have held joint meetings that many of you participated on, whether virtually or in person. We have been able to compare numbers, to look at items where they may have a little bit more expertise, and to use their numbers there and to use our numbers where we may have had a little more expertise. I also need to thank the governor and thank the Office in Planning and Budget for their help in this process in developing a reduced number that we knew was coming as COVID began to ravage our state. In committee on Wednesday, I mentioned that to call this an unusual or abnormal time would be an understatement at best. And I mentioned how last time when we were gathered, our revenue estimate number for this year was higher than the year before, and our biggest debate seemed to center on how much we would raise wages for teachers and state employees and how much we would drop the state income tax for a second time. I also mentioned that the headlines of today make the headlines of January and February feel like distant memories. Our state's financial situation has obviously dramatically shifted. I think it's important to talk about how we got here. It didn't happen overnight. We knew that in 2020 revenues were already marginal to flat to begin with. We knew we were going to have a little bit of a rough time rolling through this year. We knew that we may have to do some things in amended to true up other areas of our budget. But what we could not foresee was the overnight impact of COVID-19. Dramatic increases in cost into public health, in community health, in public safety, in the Department of Defense, as we work to protect citizens across our state, in nursing homes and hospitals, with testing and PPE. Enter into that a sales tax plummet immediately as we shut down the hottest economy that I know in my lifetime, an income tax plummet, and then an income tax delay. We saw a over $1 billion decrease from April 2019's numbers to April of 2020. That's just in 1 month. A 36.2% drop in revenues month over month, again comparing April 2020 and April 2019. But that's not all. We saw cost increase there as well. Again, talking about public health, community health, public safety, and others. Combine that with cash flow issues. You know that many of our agencies run on a cash flow basis. Our university systems, while we fund them through the Board of Regents and USG, they also have fee structures. They have auxiliary services that they run. Containers coming through our ports pay a fee that help run our ports authorities. The Georgia World Congress Center has conventions. All of those items immediately and dramatically halted. Came to a stop. The cash flow we saw there ceased. Unemployment skyrocketed. And I want to make this personal for a moment because I know each one of you have felt that in your districts as well. The questions and the calls that we get right now, while they may center on budget items today, over the past 6 weeks, they've centered over our constituents who are unemployed and working with the Department of Labor to institute new federal programs and state programs to help assist them through this time. I want to commend the Department of Labor for their activity in trying to quickly implement programs that the federal government's passed. And I raised that to bring up a second point, that we saw, it left us searching really for which, those numbers left us searching for which way was up. As we passed over to May's numbers, though, we saw a little bit of benefit. We saw things get a little bit better. But as we sent out, I need to back up before I roll into May and talk about what happened in April because I think that's important for this too. I'm sorry. That in April, because of the numbers we saw, the 36% drop in 1 month, the $1 billion, as I mentioned, you saw that all three budget writers in this building, the Senate Appropriations Committee, the House Appropriations Committee, and the Office of Planning and Budget, combined to send letters to agencies to say that they needed to send back requests and tell us what a 14% budget reduction would look like to their agencies. We didn't do that alone. No branch stepped out or no chamber stepped out individually. We did it collectively because that's what the time demanded. And how did we get to that 14% number? Well, that was based off of many things. We were looking at data on the state level. We were looking at federal numbers as well. We were looking at private sector numbers, point of sale, et cetera, to see where Georgia would land. And the numbers that seemed to resonate the most wasn't that we singled this one out specifically, but it seemed like an amalgamation of those other numbers, was the Moody's Index stress testing that said if Georgia were to see a moderate recession, we should probably expect about a 12% reduction in revenues. If it was to see a more severe recession, we should expect more like 15%. The good news under that stress test was that Georgia would survive. Georgia was just a handful of the states that they thought would make it through that. Our 14% joint request for agency reductions came out again from the House Budget Office, the Senate Budget Office, and the Office of Planning and Budget from the governor. We did that because we didn't want to see a top-down management. We weren't going to go through and say, we know your items better than you, we're going to cut here. We asked the directors and the commissioners at those levels to look at their items first, and as they dove down to the programming level, we watched as they pushed down to their middle managers, their lower managers, and did the same. Again, I'd have to compliment the 11 subcommittees for their work and their byproduct, and again, thank you for the unanimous vote out of the committee as we made that happen. When May got here, we saw our numbers approved slightly. The 36% reduction in April fell to about a 10.1% reduction in May, and I'd have to attribute that to Governor Kipps' reopening of Georgia's economy. Based on that reopening and the improved numbers, the governor was able to tell us to prepare for an 11% reduction instead of the 14% we had previously planned for. The budget before you now starts with the governor's original revenue estimate from 2020. That's on page 1. And it parks the $2.609 billion reduction, 11%, on page 4. That number you see before you, some of you may get a little confused. I see a few eyes in the audience looking at me and saying it's a little different. It's 2.07. The reason it's that way is because from number standpoints, you recognize the State Board of Workers' Compensation's payment to Treasury on one of the last pages of your document, and it pushes that 2.07 billion up to 2.09. This leaves us with about roughly 21.553 billion that we in state general funds that we now have for allocation. That sounds like a large number. I mentioned that in committee as well, but you have to remember that over 10.022 billion of that goes simply to fund our K-12 QBE formula. It moves fast, and I said before it moves even quickly when it's less. I've also said before that there's no reason to sugarcoat it. There will be less in this budget. And that our priorities here are shown not by adding more, but by simply being able to reduce less in other areas. Have we gotten it all right? No. Will there be things we think of differently later? I'm sure. But because of the efforts of the members of this body, you've tackled a difficult task with a difficult timeline, and you've sought ways to prioritize, again, your communities and your constituents. If you're going to make cuts, I'm a firm believer that leaders should start with themselves. Leaders eat last. And that's what the General Assembly's proposal does here in this budget. You'll see the Senate proposal, again, first combines the Senate Budget Office into the Senate budget. It then recognizes an 11% salary reduction for all senators in order to reduce furlough days by 5 for all Senate staff. It also recognizes a reduction of 14% to the lieutenant governor's pay in order to provide similar support for his office. We were able to also, because of our close work with the House, we were able to also take and book their reduction for their pay in their line items so that the General Assembly as a whole could show an 11% reduction. The governor instructed us to apply the 11% reduction to his programs as well, and you can see those in section 27 on page 254. After we've dealt with ourselves, after you've dealt with the leaders and the leaders eat and last philosophy, you next look at your largest items, and for us, that's going to be education. Over 54% of the Senate budget proposal is placed into education. As you know, our state funds education initiatives from pre-K to adult ed. And in this budget proposal, we were able to fully fund the pre-K classrooms with state office reductions only in order to maintain class funding for the cap slots and other items previously added in the FY 2020 amended budget earlier this session. On the K-12 formula, we were able to take 11% reduction to the QBE formula while fully funding growth, training and education, equalization, sparsity, residential treatment facilities, and also adding $122 million back to fully fund the local 5 mil share at the state's obligation of the 80-20 ratio. On higher education, we applied the 11% reduction and gave that to the Board of Regents for implementation, as is their constitutional obligation. We applied the same 11% reduction to the TSG system and allowed their board to make the same decisions there accordingly. On student finance, we were able to fully fund HOPE. On health and human services, we were able to maintain funding for rural innovation centers while also able not to reduce the rural stabilization-based funding of $3 million. I know that matters much to this area, this room. In Medicaid and Peach Care for Kids, we recognized savings from the IBNR balances, which allowed us to also fund 3 months of postpartum Medicaid coverage for mothers in line 93.9, which has also been a priority of this body. In the Department of Human Services and Behavioral Health budget, we were able to recognize unobligated TANF balances to fund out-of-home care, foster care support. We were also able to add back 2/3 of the reductions that the agencies had proposed for autism services at Emory, Matthew Reardon, and the Marcus Autism Center. We were able to use those funds to also fund the Grady Memorial Hospital's efforts at coordination of counties for the multi-coordination of emergency room use in the 13-county metro Atlanta area. We were able to add $13 million to reflect increases in spending for state-contracted private psychiatric beds at line 60.14. We were also able to annualize 125 now and comp waivers and add 50 additional to help protect our individuals in intellectually and developmentally, I can't say it this morning, I apologize, to help protect those who are most vulnerable of our intellectually and developmentally disabled. In programs like Meals on Wheels, congregate meals, and home delivered items, and Medicaid home supplies, we were able to shift those line items over into federal funds during this pandemic, which allows us to fully fund those areas as well, in lines 183.3, 183.4. On agriculture, economic development, natural resources, and transportation, you'll see that we were able to do some things that this body has long prioritized by continuing to fully fund trust funds that have been set up for decades before, including the Outdoor Stewardship Act, the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund, the Solid Waste Trust Fund, and also focusing on areas of food health and safety. And by moving things out of, that we're going to be moving over from DNR and moving them back to the Department of Ag where necessary in line 129.13. We're able to fully fund the hemp program in line 48.9, add funds for airport aid to leverage federal funds at 343.8, and modify the Department of Transportation to retain core services while focusing on their contracts. We were also able to maintain the governor's increase for $50 million in bridge bonding projects at line 357.67. In items of corrections and the judicial areas and public safety, we were able to eliminate public safety furlough days, which have been proposed at 5 weeks, and also fund capital projects for the Bureau of Investigations for vehicle and lab equipment restoration, and areas like rate kits and others that we have long prioritized in this body. Speaking, that gives us a good segue into the bond package and talk about how many of the bond package items include Senate proposals and requests. Our total bond package here is $990 million, taking advantage of historically low interest rates to fund libraries, career and college academies, agency priorities, and again, as I already mentioned, the $50 million of bridge replacement from Governor Kipps' original proposal. You don't reduce funds by 11% or $2.6 billion without somehow affecting every budget in every corner of our state. This was not a task the Appropriations Committee or this Senate tackled haphazardly or half-heartedly. And I appreciate the time and study each of you placed into crafting proposals that we diligently worked to incorporate into this document. I appreciate the comments and questions you've brought along the way, and I look forward to carrying some of those that you've brought since committee on forward to conference. You've each had a hand in tailoring and minimizing reductions for your constituents and communities, while also recognizing the monumental task at hand, and because of your input, I'm very grateful. I began this speech about one paragraph in by talking about the changes we've seen since March. The changes to our economy, the changes to our state, the changes to our revenue. And I left out one that's a big change that hangs heavy over this body as well. As you know, and as the Lieutenant Governor mentioned briefly before I took the podium, Senator Jack Sutton Hill of Reedsville served our Senate body for 29 years. He chaired this committee responsible for drafting this budget for 16 of those years, and his command of the budget process was masterful. He benefited more than rural Georgia. He benefited more than urban Georgia. He served our entire state. And Georgians he never met will long benefit from his work. Jack was never one to browbeat you with his position, but particularly with funding and the budget, his position was often right. In time, you'd generally realize it too, and Jack knew you would. But he didn't belittle you. He didn't even tell you that he knew. He didn't have to. His combination of humility, compassion, and dedication will remain unmatched for many years to come. This is the first time in roughly 20 years this budget has been presented in this chamber, and it didn't have his final sign-off. But it does have his craftsmanship. Our body and our state are better because he was here. Since the committee process, I've heard from many of you on certain line items I'd like to address up front and maybe help minimize some of the questions you may have later on. Many of you have asked about the cut to the QBE, 11% to education, and you're right, nobody in this building ran on coming here and telling people no. I realize that. But we also ran on upholding a constitutional duty to balance our budget. And when there's less, we have to meet that obligation by finding the funding, by cutting the funding areas that must do so to meet it. I've told you that in education that we spend 54% of our budget there, that QBE makes up roughly $10.022 billion of the 24-ish or now maybe $22 billion of general funds we have to spend. When we took that number, we knew it would be difficult. That's why we worked so hard underneath the Subcommittee of Education. I appreciate the subcommittee chair's work there, along with the senator from the 37th and his history in this area, to try to place back areas to make that cut be as least impactful as possible, particularly on low wealth and low income schools. That's why we did fully fund equalization, fully funding sparsity, fully funding T&E so teachers get that step that they were expecting and we don't have to come back and try to make catch up with that later, which is often impossible. We also were able to recognize $411 million of CARES funds that you will not see in your budget that have already been allocated to those K-12 districts. Not evenly necessarily. It was all done on a Title I basis by the federal government. So Title I spending typically goes to lower income schools, although Gwinnett is one of the big recipients of that funding, and equalization funding. And they received some Title I funds as well. Right now, if you look at our school systems, they actually have collectively more in savings. It's kind of an anomaly than the state. They have roughly $3.2 billion right now over the 180 systems in reserves, while the state is setting substantially below that. And that's not a bad thing that they have those reserves. I'm glad that in the years that have come previously, we've been able to help them build those reserves up. And I'm glad that the CARE funds were able to do that as well. But this is the time when we would hope you would use reserves, just as we're going to use reserves now for our state budget, potentially up to $1 billion just to finish out the amended year. Folks have also mentioned the Governor's Honors Program, and thank you for bringing that up. That's funded out of the GOSA program. We did take reductions to GOSA and applied those reductions over to help fund the 2/3 ads that we did in the Department of Behavioral Health. That program costs roughly about $1.8 million annually. It did not occur this year. There may be some cost savings from the fact that it was not able to occur this year. As we see and hope that we can do something for those kids in the fall, those funds will be available then. If we need to come in the amended and see that the 2022 program is going to, or the 2021 program will happen, we are very open to doing that and helping backfill that item as well. Mentioned education, mentioned the Governor's Honors Program. Another topic that has I've gotten many comments from many of you on since committee was maternal mortality. And if you look at, again, at line 93.9, you'll see that we were able to extend, even in this, one of the few ads in this budget was to extend postpartum Medicaid coverage care for 3 months. And I think you need to view that in light of also what's happening with the enhanced FMAP formulas and with the federal changes due to the CARES Act that say that if you are currently on the Medicaid rolls, you cannot come off. So if a woman is privileged enough to have a baby in October, and say she had it today, that's a little bit easier. We know we're still under the president's emergency orders. Because we are now in June, that emergency orders say that individual may not be removed from any Medicaid rolls through the end of that quarter, which would be September 30th. If someone were to have a baby on September 30th, what this budget provides for is it would pay their funds through December of this year. If the president's emergency order is extended into October, then they would already receive those funds into December even without our bill. And I know the senator from the 40th and others have worked on that measure. That there's a bill pending right now in our body that would extend that to 6 months. I'm sure it will receive consideration. We've been talking with the Department of Community Health to know that to expect that 1115 waiver back before December would probably be a little bit wishful thinking, so we've tried to budget accordingly. In the end, I think it's important to say I think our checkbook, our wallet, our budget reflects our priorities. And I want to tell you the percentage of our budget in certain areas that I think reflects our state's priorities. 13.3% of this Senate budget proposal goes to community health. 7.4% goes to transportation. Public safety and the judiciary receive 8.7% of this budget proposal. Human development, 8%. Bonds, which again go to mainly fund schools, road bridges, some libraries, education, 5.25%. 1.1% is dedicated to agriculture, and education makes up 54% of this Senate budget proposal. The remaining 2% funds everything else, like us and most of the marble buildings you see around here, including Department of Labor, Department of Insurance, and others. In closing, I want to acknowledge that I know this is not the budget that many of you expected or hoped to have this year. As I've already said, you didn't campaign on reducing services or on saying no. That wasn't the way you asked for votes. But our constitutional duty is to pass a budget to operate the functions of our state. Before you this day, for debate and consideration, is a budget that does just that. And that, again, as I've told you before, I think prioritizes the items that we care about most. Based on that, I'd appreciate your vote in favorable consideration for the Senate Committee substitute to House Bill 793. Thank you, Mr. President. If there are no questions, I'll yield the will.
Does any senator have a question? The chair sees none. Chair would like to recognize the minority leader to speak to the bill.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, I rise today with a difficult task. Difficult to see a state with so many challenges, some brought on by a pandemic, but many of these problems are brought on by our previous actions as a legislature. Some of the problems we have were brought on by sickness of health, some by sicknesses of our policies and decisions of the past. We have to remember this pandemic is causing us to do things that we don't like. But we are put into a terrible, terrible position because we've made bad decisions. And I, for one, am asking members of my caucus to oppose this budget because it brings forth the true troubles that we have been building over years. We have underfunded education. We have underfunded higher education. We have made tax and policy decisions which have undermined the strength of this state and the future of our children. We have seen over the years, and especially over the last 20 years, a lack of commitment to our K through 12 and higher education, to our health and human services, and to our roads and our infrastructures. We have seen tax policies that have rewarded the rich and taken away from the poor and the middle class and the upper middle class, and given it again to the rich or special interest groups. A couple sessions ago, we alone passed a tax cut on income tax that was more heavily skewed to the wealthy. But we hadn't even addressed the problems that had arisen just from the Great Recession. You know, people will tout, and I've heard in committee and on the radio, people saying we fully fund QBE. But we do that only to disregard of the facts, that QBE is not fully adjusted for inflation, that there are other educational expenditures that are not QBE that we had cut and we have not restored over the years. We do so much that we do without really opening the light of day on the problem. That is why I am voting no on this budget, to try to bring a little light to some of the challenges we have. We can't tout that we're the #1 state in the country to do business when we know that matrix is primarily on how we treat our workers and not on the quality of life that workers that come to the state will have. If you look at the national rankings on quality of life, we're not #1. We're around number 40, 37, 38. If you look at our national ranking on maternal mortality, about the worst in the country. Public education for K through 12, one of the worst in the country. We can and should do better. And we have not stepped up to the plate, ladies and gentlemen. We have seen the way we treat our employees of the state grow worse and worse over the years. When we had the budget in February, I brought to you that a state employee making $40,000, and most of you know $40,000 is a hard amount to live on. They were making that wage in 2008. They were only making about $43,000 today. But if you just adjusted inflation, it'd be just about $50,000. We have taken away their future by not investing in them. We've made mistakes that we need to address, and we're not addressing them, and we need to address them as we go forward. State employees, our public safety, our educators, they've all seen their earnings drop because we don't invest in them. Human capital. For state employees, not only have they seen their wages drop, they've seen their pensions be reduced. Instead of 2% for a year, they get 1% and a small match on a IRA or a 401k. We've seen health insurance shares go up for employees, and the state hasn't put the money there. And yet, we've done these tax breaks and cuts without addressing those underlying problems. We've seen the state ranking on our infrastructure and how we rate in the country on our roads across the state decline. We've seen our local governments challenged by our decisions. And while we crow about cutting taxes here and beat our chests, we've seen local government, and you know this, local government after local government having to raise property taxes on the local level to pay for our schools, and then have to pass SPLOST, sales tax at the local level, to try to keep their roads and capital investments where they should be. Ladies and gentlemen, I will vote against this budget, not just because it takes money from autism for children or mental health, not just because there is a over $1 billion cut to education. I know that we have a pandemic. I know that we have to face facts, that we have to be in the real world. But I also know that we cannot continue to have policies and decisions based on responding to corporate lobbyists that want tax breaks and not on the best needs of the 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds of our state that want to have a bright future. I will no longer be able to vote for a budget if I do not think that the policymakers have any clue that our waters are no longer getting cleaner, that they're getting less clean, that the EPD cannot do their job, that the 10,000 state employees less that we have today than a few years ago is just not because we're acting wiser and more efficiently in governance, but because we have really allowed state to not to do some of the core important functions that they should do. That when we have children in defects, the caseworkers have a manageable load. That when we have state patrol and police on the streets, that there's a safe and adequate amount for them to be safe and act appropriately. We need, as a state government and as leaders, to be leading in the right direction. And for too long, I think, we have neglected the citizens of our state in investing in their future. I know that it is tax dollars that come from citizens. And I know that if we worked wisely together, we could bring a balance of fair taxation that promoted our state to quality growth and a better quality of life. But I have not seen that in the last few years. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to defeat this budget, not only because of the cuts that are difficult today, but because we need to come together as a body, be inclusive, to talk about the real underlying problems our state have. And quite frankly, I don't think that my party and many members of the majority caucus as well have really brought to the table the cries of help of too many have been ignored for too long. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield the well if there's no questions.
You have no questions. Chair recognizes the senator from the 45th to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of House Bill 793, and I think it's very interesting that as I come up here and in my last year, that I do remember 2008 and 2009 and those particular budgets during the Great Recession, and I do remember the minority party supporting the bill, the appropriation bills that came through during the Great Recession. And I think it's very interesting now in 2020 in a very partisan world when they are preaching and promoting bipartisanship, that this will actually probably be the first time that I can ever remember that the minority party is not supporting the appropriations budget. And that's pretty remarkable because during the appropriations process, those same minority members are coming forward and asking for line items put into the budget, but yet they will sit here and vote against the things that they asked to be put into the budget. So that's pretty remarkable to me. But before I talk about that, though, I want to talk about our former chairman, Jack Hill, and our current chairman has done a fabulous job. The new chairman from the 19th has done a very good job stepping into the role and having to doing it expediently. He's done a remarkable job, and I'm very proud of him. But Jack Hill leaves a legacy in each one of us here in the Senate. And that legacy, that footprint, is that knowledge that he imprinted in us. I know for me, myself, it took me 5 years to actually learn the budget. And when you look at those documents, and now they're computerized, but a long time ago, you received about 3 or 4 inches in 2 different books. And you had to learn those budgets, and it was very, very complicated. And his legacy is truly alive because we are his legacy. And what is even more remarkable to me is that he shared that knowledge even when the House membership had a very brand new, spanking new chairman in Terry England. And I always called him the Silver Fox because he could outfox the House members. But he imparted that same knowledge in us, also in the House members. He was not selfish at all, even though he knew that we had to compete with them and come up with a bill and compromises, he still wanted everybody on equal footing. And to me, that was just a remarkable thing. And the thing that I remember most about Jack Hill, it didn't matter how many times I asked him, year after year, please explain to me the funding formula for FMAP and why we're changing it this year. He never got tired of that question. He never got tired of new members coming in and them not being able to understand it for about 5 years. He never lost his patience. And to me, that was remarkable. And he did the same thing with TANF funding. And a lot of people sitting in here right now don't know TANF funding. But because of Jack Hill, a lot of us do. And the chairman talked about his craftsmanship. And I think that's really what he taught us, is caring and caring about the least of these. And that's the number one priority that we have, is caring about those who don't have a voice, whether they're babies, whether they're age, whether it's about education, and people who don't vote, who don't lobby, who don't have lobbyists in the hall. And I just want to say thank you. And I rise because I've had the privilege of not only working with him, but many of you and many of your predecessors in working on the budgets for Department of Behavioral Health, Developmental Disabilities, Addiction Services, Public Health, Veterans, vocational rehab. The list goes on and on and on of those components of the budget that we have meshed together. Department of Human Services, whether it's foster care, whether it's children advocacy, the list goes on and on and on. And what has made an impression on me in my life is not the numbers that are sitting on your desk and these books that are sitting on your desk. It's the people and the advocates. It's not these lobbyists that are standing in the hall that get paid big money. It's the advocates for the nonprofits that are at home that are your constituents. And to me, that's been the advantage of being an appropriator of this money, is learning people from your district. Whether it was Miss Annette Bowling, we used to call her the Queen of South Georgia, because there was nothing about developmental disabilities and federal drawdown and matching money and exploiting that money so that you got a better and bigger match from state dollars on the local level, the state level, and the federal level. No one was better than Annette Bowling. I'll never forget taking Miss Annette downstairs to meet former Governor Deal. She had a new idea. Her new idea was the reentry program for people who were being discharged from the correction system. And she did residential housing. That idea became a key component in accountability courts and Governor Deal's very famous criminal justice reform program. So going back to 2008 and 2009, we cut the budget 10%. And we thought that was terrible. We thought that was draconian. But the number one thing that Jack Hill taught us, and I hope is your legacy as I'm leaving here, is the most important thing that matters in this budget is our AAA bond rating. And all you have to do is look at California, New York, and Illinois and see states who are dependent upon that deficit in their pension programs that drag them down. In 2008, 2009, we have consistently maintained our AAA bond rating. And even through this great recession and the numbers that we're looking at today, we're still going to balance our budget and maintain that AAA bond rating. And that is what Jack Hill was most proud of. That is what I'm leaving behind, that I'm most proud of. And Governor Kemp, I know that's his number one thinking, is how do we maintain that AAA bond rating? I'm going to move on, and I want to talk about a couple of programs that I hope that the conferees of the Budget Committee, when they go into the rooms this weekend, I know they're going to work all day Saturday. I know they're going to work all day Sunday. And hopefully they're going to come back with some compromises and some money that will hopefully fund some of these programs that were left in a deficit or were cut in half. And one of the things I learned, and I'm going to pontificate, and y'all have to listen to me because I got a few more days here. But one of the things that I learned from 2008 and 2009 when we were cutting the budget, we cut some fantastic programs. And I know the senator from the 38th and the senator from the 55th remember this very well. And it was called a barbershop program, and it was started in Savannah, Georgia. And it was where we went in the sweet potato belt. That's what we called it because it had a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease and diabetes, stroke, hypertension. And we went into those barbershops and we taught the barber because we knew that people had to get a haircut every 4 to 6 weeks. Well, when they would come into the barbershop, they would get their blood pressure checked. And while the barber's sitting there cutting the hair, he would say, well, how are you feeling? How's your sugar doing? Have you passed out? Have you felt short of breath? Has anything changed in your life? And if it has, maybe you need to go back to the doctor. Well, the first thing we did in 2008 and 2009 when we took out our red pen was cut some of those programs. Well, guess what? That program never came back. And one of the programs that I'm most interested in is a program this year in 2018 and 19 that we started that I hope does not become like the barbershop program. And that is the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, where a group of nurses came to the Health Committee here in the Senate and said, we have an innovative program of wraparound services for mothers prenatally that are addicted. They were addicted to heroin, to opiates, to prescription drugs, and to alcohol, and their babies had fetal alcohol syndrome, and oftentimes their babies had failure to thrive syndrome. So my goal, we've cut that program in half at Northeast Georgia. It has received renowned attention across the United States in major medical publications. Other government, other entities have copied that wraparound services where we go in and we take care of that mother while she's addicted prenatally and that baby. The cost savings on that particular program is after 2 years of this program, the babies were staying in the hospital beforehand in the neonatal intensive care unit for 31 days. It cost approximately $3,000 a day for the baby to be in the neonatal intensive care unit. So the cost savings went down after 2 years of this program. Babies are now staying an average of 9 days. So the impact on the Medicaid budget is significant. But the down ticket item is also when babies do not go into foster care because you're reuniting that mother and getting her off of drugs at the same time the baby. And if you've ever seen a baby that is born 2 to 3 days and goes into convulsions and has withdrawal symptoms, there is nothing, absolutely nothing sadder in your life. And you also know that the state of Georgia probably will be taking care of that baby until it reaches the age of 18 years old because of the developmental disabilities that occur with the addiction syndrome. So some of the other things I want to talk about, fortunately that 14% to 10% has been remarkable because we've been able to restore some of that money. A lot of that money is in the autism program. Autism started in this room with the autism mandates and the programs, and unfortunately we were cutting some of those programs. We found the money to restore some of the autism, and I hope that we are able to restore some more of that autism money. The other issue is family support. When I was campaigning this fall and this summer, I met a young man, and he was in his early 20s, and because of HIPAA, I can't talk a lot about his case. But he is basically nonverbal. He has a feeding tube, and he went to Creative Enterprises for a day program. And unfortunately, in this budget, a lot of those family support and also the grant and aid programs are cut. So that means on July 1st, a lot of these developmental, intellectually challenged folks are going to go and not be able to go to their day programs. And especially during COVID, when these parents don't have the opportunity because they're now taking care of their kids, and their kid may be 30 years old, they don't have the opportunity to go to the grocery store. They don't have the opportunity to have the luxury of an extra 2 hours to run errands because they're taking care of that child who is an adult 24/7 because of the respite programs being cut. Hopefully those can be restored. Another big program, you know, we always talk about gentlemen's agreements. Well, I hate to tell you, but we've also got ladies' agreements. And ever since I've been in this body and have written this budget, I've had an agreement with the House member. And my equal person on the House side is Katie Dempsey. And we have always had a ladies' agreement that whatever the House put in on the now and comp waivers, there's over 7,000 people in the state of Georgia waiting on now and comp waivers, that whatever they put in, the Senate would match. This is the very first year we have not kept that ladies' agreement. There's 50 slots in there. I would like to see 100 slots put into the budget and restore that. So with that, I want to close out and talk about something else that this body in the Senate has been famous for as far as community health, behavioral health, and Department of Human Services, and that's addiction and substance abuse. We started the recovery programs in this room, and we funded it. And we're very proud to say we have almost 20, I believe, recovery centers in the state of Georgia. Those programs have been cut, and the reason it was cut was because autism was completely cut out, and we took some money from the recovery programs to put into autism. The recovery programs are there, and this is the last little bit of knowledge that I want to leave with y'all that are staying here. The recovery programs were not about sustainability, that they would always be supported by the state of Georgia. The whole goal, when we first started them, when we went to Marietta in Cobb County, and we went to the zone was completely 100% supported by the community. And we wanted to replicate those recovery centers in the rest of the state. And we have done it. But the goal is not for them to always be dependent upon the state, is to start the program and then turn it back over to the community. And that theoretically is a great idea. And it has been a great idea until COVID hit. Because now that COVID hit, you can't go back to the community, and the state becomes the safety net, because all of the nonprofits across the state of Georgia have been cut. So when you go back to the community and you say, well, you have to chip in, the state is going to wean us off. Well, the community can't chip in, and they won't chip in because they're trying to stay alive themselves, especially in the business community. So I'm asking you, in the recovery community, we've done fabulous work. That is our legacy. That is Jack Hill's legacy. We have to step up to the plate and be that safety net, especially during COVID. I can't tell you how many meetings the senator from I have been on those meetings, those Zoom meetings, and you have been on those Zoom meetings from Cobb County. because especially with addiction, is peer-to-peer support. And you can't do peer-to-peer support if you can't have one-on-one contact. And a lot of people who are destitute, they don't have access to the internet. So they haven't been able to participate in those Zoom meetings. So now more than ever, you don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face. We need to keep up our addiction, our substance abuse programs, because it is cost-saving. Not only is it compassionate and the right thing to do, but now more than ever, with troubled times, with families in dire situations, with the incidence of suicide, with the incidence of addiction going up, this is our safety net, and we have to step up to the budget. So with that, Mr. President, I think I have been on my soapbox long enough. I just want to say to all those advocates that I have written the budget with you. It has not been me. It has been with you across the state of Georgia, taking care of 11 million Georgians. When I look back on my time in the Georgia State Senate, and I look back what has been special to me, it has obviously been those relationships that I've developed in that trust. This is not the Senate and the House budget. This is the people of Georgia. And I encourage those advocates, don't get discouraged. Good times are going to return again. Let's keep those line items in the budget. We're going to flourish. We're going to do better. We're going to provide that safety net, and things are going to be good again. Thank you so much, Mr. President, and I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 6th to speak to House Bill 793.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to acknowledge the hard work of the chairman and the budget office and all of the subcommittee chairs and appropriations members. These are indeed difficult times. But as all of you know, the Appropriations Committee, the staff, the chair, they are given the governor's revenue number, and then they have to make it work. That is our constitutional obligation. We all know that. And in this budget, I have to tell you, the cuts are extreme. They're harmful. And so what I want to talk about is that they didn't necessarily have to be. As indicated by the minority leader, it is about choices. It is about policy choices. And I'm not going to sit here and go through a laundry list of things that have compounded our state's economic crisis. But I do want to address one in particular, and something that we could still act on. Now, while I've been told there's little interest in bringing in new revenue to cut our way out of a hole, and specifically I've been told that the cigarette tax, or raising the cigarette tax, is a non-starter. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the cigarette tax. So what is it? What's the cigarette tax? Simply, it's a sales tax or a user fee on the sale of cigarettes in this state. It's pretty straightforward. Currently, we are 48 out of 50 states in terms of the cigarette tax. We've got a really low one. And to be clear, what I'm advocating for is simply to raise the cigarette tax just to the national average. That's it, just to the average. But whenever we as a deliberative body consider policies, we need to consider all sides. I get that, so let's do it. On one side of this equation are the tobacco companies. And I think they're doing okay. For example, Altria, the new and improved name for Philip Morris, has revenues of over $26 billion plus. And to put that in context, that is about what the annual revenue for the state of Georgia is. So just think about that. And then they have profits of over $10 billion. The company itself is valued over $118 billion. And so you may be thinking, well, how has the economic freefall affected the cigarette companies? Well, For those of you who know, cigarette sales are up. So then what's on the other side as we think about this equation? Well, it's the people of this state. The teachers and the educators facing over $1 billion in cuts. Those in public safety facing cuts and furloughs. And look, there's always a lot of words of support for these particular groups in this chamber. Whose side are you on? This is the time to raise the cigarette tax just to the national average. And apart from the fact that we're facing a multi-billion-dollar shortfall in revenue in this state, there's also a simple reason to raise it. Currently, the cigarette tax only brings in $230 million. Currently, the state of Georgia pays $650 million in total Medicaid costs that are caused by smoking. So there's a shortfall of $420 million on what we are already paying for cigarette-related diseases in Georgia. Georgians, taxpayers, are paying the $420 million per year. Georgians, taxpayers, are paying for the decision of many who make the decision to smoke cigarettes. And while I don't agree with smoking, people can make the choice for themselves. The words personal responsibility are often invoked in this chamber. And so for me, raising the cigarette tax is about personal responsibility. It should not be for the people of this state to pay for the decisions of others, decisions that we know will lead to tobacco-related disease, and to millions of dollars, millions of state dollars being spent to treat those diseases. Raising the cigarette tax just to the national average would bring in over $600 million. So again, whose side are you on? What could $600 million pay for? What cuts in the budget before us could that money pay for? How many furlough days? You know, don't let cigarettes sacrifice, or an addiction to cigarettes and our having to pay for it sacrifice the public and fiscal health of this state. Don't let cigarettes be the most powerful thing in this chamber. And ask yourself, whose side are you on? I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 34th. The senator from the 34th. There she comes. Take your time. Take your time. To speak to House Bill 793.
Happy Friday, Juneteenth. Mr. President, members of the Senate, I appreciate all that has been done in the budget, but more funding should go towards maternal mortality in rural and urban Georgia. Since Black women die 3 to 4 times more than any other race, and we are dying disproportionate in this pandemic. It could have been me as a Black mother of 2 preemies. Thanks be to God, they are alive and well, and they have given us 2 apiece, adorable grands. This is more than urgent, but it is time to restore funds in this area. Blacks and people of color cannot continue to die in a civil society. I do want to thank the chairlady, Sharon Cooper, for her help with my speech and language bill, and for helping to fund this important line item in the budget, and the Women Legislative Caucus for taking this issue on as a caucus position, especially State Representative Abel Mabel Thomas. Mr. President, I'll yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 55th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I too want to recognize my good friend Jack Hill. Jack was solid as a rock. When he worked this budget, it was like magic almost, because he could work it never with a frown on his face when you go to him and talk to him about an item in the budget or whatever it was in the budget that you wanted to talk about. He'd explain it to you. You could ask for a report. He'd get it to you and be glad to do it. And I know at this time we miss him. But I also thank the new chair for his work. I know it was probably a struggle at times and hard work, but somehow he got it done. And what I really want to talk about this morning is a little bit about the pandemic, Medicaid expansion, and closing our coverage gap. I really hate to see us, and I have to be careful when I use that word hate. My daughter says, Mama, that's a strong word. But I really wish that we did not have to cut anything in health care at this time, especially during this pandemic, when health care is at its most critical time. It's so important that everybody be able to get the care that they need. The worst part is we could shore up Medicaid in large part by expanding Medicaid expansion under the ACA and receiving that large federal match. That would have helped this budget tremendously. This budget also cuts the Department of Health, which is the primary agency tasked with responding to this pandemic. That's the last department that needs money taken away from it. Georgians need health coverage to stay healthy. They could gain that coverage that they need under Medicaid expansion. Those people that are under 138% of the federal poverty level, or about $17,600 for an individual, $23,790 for a family of two, and $29,970 for a family of three. That's not a lot of money. 60% of people who would be covered by Medicaid expansion are working but often not offered health benefits through their job. Or they don't get paid enough to care of their own health insurance. Only 41% of Georgia's employers offer employer-sponsored health insurance. Closing Georgia's coverage gap would extend health insurance to over 155,000 uninsured women. Georgia ranks among the bottom 5 states for women's health insurance coverage. We ought to be ashamed of that. That is nothing to be proud of. Closing the coverage gap could extend health insurance to nearly half of Georgia's uninsured veterans, expanding coverage to 32,000 uninsured veterans and military spouses in our state. Closing the coverage gap would help address racial disparities in health care access and outcomes. About 36% of Georgians in the coverage gap are African Americans, and 22% are Latino. Closing the coverage gap yields economic benefits and helps accelerate economic recovery. For every dollar the state spends on closing the coverage gap, Georgia receives up to $9 in federal funding. Closing the coverage gap could create 56,000 jobs in Georgia each year and boost the state's economic output by $6.5 billion annually. Closing the coverage gap could create 12,000 jobs and $1.3 billion in new economic activity in Georgia's rural communities each year. Georgians are already paying federal taxes towards closing our coverage gap, but state leaders have refused billions in federal health care dollars meant to pay for Georgians' health coverage and stabilize struggling rural hospitals. Stabilizing struggling rural hospitals by closing the coverage gap. 7 rural hospitals have shuttered since 2013. That means they're closed. And more than half of Georgia's remaining rural hospitals are financially vulnerable to closure. At least 118 counties in Georgia are considered rural because they have a population of less than 50,000. Many Georgia hospitals are struggling because they treat so many patients who don't have health insurance and cannot afford high out-of-pocket costs. Closing the coverage gap opens up an important revenue stream to ensure rural communities have access to health care. Taxpayers end up paying a share of the cost for uninsured people who show up in emergency rooms because they don't have a doctor. Closing the coverage gap would allow people to go to their own doctor if they had a doctor, instead of the emergency rooms when they are sick. Other states could see our state, or other states see significant reductions in uncompensated care after closing their coverage gaps. Arkansas experienced 56.4% decrease. Kentucky saw a 59.7% decrease. Let's get this done, Georgia. Close the coverage gap. Allow the people in our state to get the health care that they deserve, that they need for their families. Mr. President, I just wanted to come to the well and make these points, and I am unable on today to support this budget because I can't stand to see the people of this state go without. Mr. President, I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 52nd to speak to House Bill 793.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will try to be brief. I do really appreciate the work of the Appropriations Chair. Our previous Appropriations Chair with his incredible job was a job you wouldn't want to follow, and he's just done great work on that. And I will point out that Chairman Hill last year at a weekend conference brought up 6 times that he doesn't raise revenue, that my Finance Committee does. He only has to figure out how to spend it. And I told him I didn't remember him saying that in the previous years when the revenue was good, but he certainly is missed, and I can't think of anybody that could do a better job than the chair that's come in. I want to give my home city of Rome a little credit for him. I went to the smallest elementary school, and his dad was 3 grades ahead of me at that school. So he comes from Roman stock, and sometimes I think he's more popular there than I am, so I hope he doesn't run for office up there. We are looking on the Finance Committee at revenue sources, and we don't all agree on all of that all the time, but we passed out yesterday tax credits that would be done away with in the spirit that we're taking a cut, the governor's staff budget's taking a cut, the lieutenant governor, different departments. Let's look at these if there's important. It was over $200 million. I was disappointed that a couple of members of the other party were the only 2 that did vote against it. And as we try to look for revenue, in the IRC bill, we think there's additional revenue there because the senator from the 8th made a point, and we held out a vote, and we came back and looked at it and realized there's potentially millions of dollars there that we sent forward in that bill. So we will continue to work on revenue. The chair of appropriations is given what he's given. He doesn't get a penny more, and that's what he has to do with. And I can't imagine anybody doing a better job than what he's done for this, and I fully support his effort in this budget.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 36th to speak to House Bill 793.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I am deeply troubled by the fact that we continue to shoot ourselves in the foot rather than increasing our revenues. We make decisions based, I suppose, on ideological points of view and we just heard a total explication of that by the senator from the 55th about how we have sat here for years and failed to expand the Medicaid coverage, failed to cover people with health insurance that are covered in other states. If they just lived in another state, there are like only 14 states that have not done that. We are among them, and we have some of the weakest Medicaid funding in the country, and we have one of the largest populations of uninsured citizens. But yet, that's off the table. That's off the table. And the first years that we rejected this, it was 100% match. 100% covered by the feds. Now, every dollar we would spend on expansion is covered with $9 of federal money. We could have had money flowing into our hospital system. We get up here and cry crocodile tears about the state of the rural hospitals. Well, we had the choice. The leadership of at least 2 governors has had the choice since 2010. That federal money has been flowing out to states that expanded their Medicaid. So when we bemoan our limited options and explain how much it hurts that we have to make these deep cuts, I just can't buy it when this General Assembly cut the income tax for the top earners in our state. And you can't get a straight answer from anybody about how much that hit our budget, the 2018 a bill that did that. And we were set to do it again. They were going to, they were all bulled up to lower it again this year until the pandemic just hit us in the face, and it suddenly the ridiculousness of that proposal was too much for anybody to defend. But we can look around the country and see other states that are handling this in a different way and are expanding the pie and are not trying to cut our way through this crisis, but in fact are doing everything they can to avoid the devastating cuts that we're putting in this budget. And it's beyond my comprehension to understand anybody saying with a straight face that we should not increase the user fee on tobacco. Defend that for me, please. We heard the senator from the 6th make an excellent set of points about that. How can you argue that you should not get up to the national average on the user fee on cigarettes. It's an optional thing. People can choose to smoke or they can choose to get into a prevention program. But when you take that money and you fund prevention, you stop the next generation from embracing cigarettes. 13-year-olds are not going to be going in their pocket for cigarettes when it costs what it costs in other parts of the country. But no, we've kept that artificially low cigarette tax. And we're spending $640 million a year in our Medicaid budget on tobacco-related illness. That's why it's not hard for me to vote against this budget when I see all the options on the table for us to bring in more revenue, and we fail to do it. We fail to do it. The lessons are there. In the states that expanded their Medicaid coverage and got everybody insured with health insurance, the health of their bottom line of the hospitals is better. The health care infrastructure in their state is better. The health of their citizens is better. I mean, but you feel like you're beating a dead horse when you get up here and say these things, because the wall goes down, the curtain goes down. No, we're not going to do that. No, we're not going to put a tax on cigarettes. No, we're not. We don't tax vaping products. No, we're not going to do that. And pray tell, why not? And why did you lower corporate income tax? Why on earth was that a smart policy to do? That created a bigger hole, dug us a bigger hole in the budget. So it's not a difficult decision for me. Now, I will say this. I understand the hours and the hard work that's been put in for, as we say, 2 decades by Senator Jack Hill. You could not ask for a better man. You could not ask for more diligence and more straightforwardness and more integrity. He is deeply missed. I know that people have spent hours, nights, and days operating within this framework of having this kind of budget deficit shortfall to find ways to find workarounds and get through this difficult time. But I say to you, if you would throw open the windows, raise the blinds, and look around at other states and what they are doing and what we would benefit from by expanding Medicaid, by reducing special interest tax expenditures for the special interest, and by taxing cigarettes. There's numbers of ways that we can expand our budget and be in a position to not be making these draconian cuts, but in fact throwing a lifeline out here to Georgians who need it now more than ever. And I will just say, as I take my seat on this day, on Juneteenth, the day that marked the last word reaching Texas that slavery had been ended as a federal policy. On this day, we should feel compelled to look at how all of these cuts and these deficits and these programs lacking money and the public education and the public health funding that's not what it needs to be, at how it impacts our African American population here in this state and other communities of color. We're in the midst of a pandemic where the COVID-19 rates of infection and of death, again, disparate impact on the African American community and other minority communities. So now more than ever, we should be looking for ways to go in a different direction. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll take my seat and ask you to consider in your heart if there's not more that we can do as a state to raise revenues and make a bigger pie that we're cutting rather than cutting in the budget. Thank you.
Senator has yielded well. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against House Bill 793? The chair sees none. Does the chairman of Appropriations want to speak to the measure? He waives. The question now is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? The chair hears none, and the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. The questions on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of the bill vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. As a reminder, we have waived the 60-second rule. Please make your way to the chamber and vote your machines. Just a few more votes out there, senators. If you have not voted your machines yet, please make your way to the chamber and vote your machine. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? Mr. Secretary, please lock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 34, the nays are 15. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. For what purpose does the senator from the 19th rise?
Mr. President, I ask that the Senate immediately transmit House Bill 793.
Senator from the 19th has asked that this chamber immediately transmit House Bill 793 to the House. Is there objection? Chair hears none, and it is so. Are there any unanimous consents? Chair hears none. Does any senator wish to rise on a point of personal privilege? Chair recognizes the minority, the senator from the 44th. Chair recognizes the senator from the 44th for a point of personal privilege. can remind the chamber to come back to order. We're going to go on to personal privilege, points of personal privilege. The chair recognizes the senator from the 44th in the well.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senators, I rise today just to say happy Juneteenth. I think since I've been in the Senate these years, we have not met in June, so we have not come to the well to say happy Juneteenth. And then last night, our commander-in-chief said that he made Juneteenth famous. Nobody knew about it. And I'm just here to say that many people celebrate Juneteenth. And in Clayton County, as executive director of the Clayton County Black History Center, for the past 20 years, we have had that celebration. Before then, we just did celebrate it in our backyards. We don't have a Black History Center, as I promised the citizens in 1989, because I haven't raised $1 million to have it. But we have programs every year. February, Black History programs. In June, Juneteenth, and in December, Kwanzaa. So we do have those programs. This year, we're going to do two things, and that is encourage people to go get tested for COVID-19 and wear your mask so that you will not infect others. And then the second thing is the census. The census is important, and we're going to join in my district, Senate District 44, Commissioner Larry Johnson and the CEO of DeKalb County, Michael Thurman, in spearheading the census in the community. Fill out the census form. Census is important because it brings funds to the community. More jobs and businesses, increase in public school funding, pre-K, more hospitals, clinics, sidewalks, street lights, veterans programs, transit, roads, and parks. And so those are the things that we're going to do this time. It is important for us to recognize Juneteenth with this, and the budget is important. One of the things that I want to say is that with this budget, we have a pandemic, and we're going to cut health care. Infant mortality and maternal mortality is important. So Juneteenth is something that we celebrate, and we want to encourage you to celebrate it. I'm wearing my t-shirt today. It's a little small, but I want to make sure that you know about Juneteenth. And on the back of this, you have it here. I think one is from 2011 and one is for 2017. But on the back of it, on the t-shirt, it says Juneteenth, Freedom Day, celebration of abolition of slavery on June the 19th, 1865. It was June the 19th that the Union soldiers landed in Galveston, Texas, with news that the Civil War had officially ended. They also reported that slavery had ended around 2.5 years earlier after President Lincoln signed and issued the Emancipation Proclamation, thus officially ending slavery in America. So happy Juneteenth Day. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the Majority Leader for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have on our desk there some privilege resolutions that we're going to look at, and one of them we've talked about. The gentleman we talked about a pretty good bit today. We talked about Jack Hill significantly and his impact that he's made on the Senate and the budget process over a period of time, and we wouldn't be where we are today without him. But there's another one on there that that recognizes the senator from the 41st. Not only has he served his constituents well, but he has been a strong voice for all Georgians since his time in the Senate. He and I have had the opportunity to work closely in our roles as serving as the majority and minority leaders here. And quite often we did not agree on the how to accomplish the important issues that impact our state. But I place him in the highest level of accolades that you can give another human. I've always known him to be a man of honor and a man worthy of respect. Senator, I appreciate your service to Georgia, your willingness to sit down with me so that we can listen to each other's points of views, And finally, I appreciate the friendship you've always shown me. The state will miss you.
Well said. Make that in the form of a motion, please. Chair recognizes the senator from the 2nd to speak to a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, kicking off the long process of ending slavery in the United States. But it wasn't until 2.5 years later that all enslaved people were actually free. On June 19, 1865, Texas became the last state to recognize the end of slavery, a milestone celebrated today as Juneteenth, or as we may call it, Freedom Day. After 155 years, Juneteenth, a celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation of enslaved Americans, is being acknowledged as a holiday by corporations. It's being recognized by communities across this country. Today, we consider why, throughout its history, Juneteenth has gained prominence in moments of pain in the struggle for African Americans in America. Juneteenth should be a holiday in the state of Georgia. Juneteenth is observing the end of slavery in the United States and marked the day when news of emancipation reached people in the deepest parts of the former Confederacy. More attention is turning to the holiday following the global protests sparked by the death of George Floyd, sparked by the death of Breonna Taylor, sparked by the death of Ahmaud Arbery, sparked by the death of Rayshard Brooks, as well as a national conversation to rethink policies in America. Across the country, civil unrest has provoked conversations amongst major companies and media organizations pressing for change on diversity. Companies including Nike, companies including Adidas, and far more has made statements condemning racism. Although the Emancipation Proclamation is an executive order declaring that all persons held as slaves would be free, was signed by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863, and General Robert E. Lee surrendered in Virginia, marked the end of the Civil War in April 1965. Now, in 2020, African Americans still can't breathe freedom. Now, in 2020, African Americans still can't breathe justice. In honor of Juneteenth in 2020, we are called to be a moment. We are called to be a movement. We are called to be a movement for social justice. We are called to be a movement for reform. We are called, black and white, Baptist and Methodist, Catholic and Jewish, urban and rural, we are called to be a movement for social change. Today, as we celebrate Juneteenth, let's all celebrate a new beginning in Georgia by passing a hate crime bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Minority Whip for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. I take my personal privilege to discuss the fact that one of the things that the pastor today was talking about, to listen to God, and that God has a way of enlightening us, and I think that's true today. Because all the days that we could have resolved this hate crime bill, it is today that we're on the prefaces, hopefully, of doing that. So on Juneteenth, when slaves in Texas learned of their freedom, which is now celebrated worldwide, the Georgia State Senate, and specifically the Georgia Senate Judiciary Committee, has the opportunity to maximize that through passing a hate crimes bill. So we could have done it on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, but here we are. God has put us in this position today to move this bill forward. Through all of the negotiations, all the trials and tribulations, we are here today. And so I have some encouragement, but I also have serious reservations that we would listen to the historical nature of this and go forward in the way that we can, or at least in the way that this senator can. As we support Juneteenth and slavery, I would just point out that what slavery is. State-sponsored, sanctioned buying and selling of human beings. I will share with you, Mr. President, and others, when I went to the clerk of courts here in Augusta, Georgia, she had what's called slave books. They're books but about as big as our books on our desk, in single space, which is nothing but persons being bought and sold for over 200 years in Augusta. Every single clerk's office in this state, every single clerk's office in any state, in every county which had slaves has a slave trade book. It is about as innocuous and as simple as we do simple buying and selling of property. There's no emotion to it or anything. It may simply say Harold Jones was sold to whoever and for whatever price, and that's it. There's no caring, there's no concern, and that went on all the time. And this went on from 1619 to 1865, the buying and selling of human beings. And I think sometimes we look at it as though these persons were bought, and like one family was bought and sold, and that's all slavery. Think about the fact that your children are born into slavery. Think about the fact as a man, if your wife was harmed in any way, the detrimental effect that would have on you. But persons who are born in slavery live that every single day. It's not one family. This is what happened through generation after generation after generation. You had no agency at all over yourself. After that, we went to Jim Crow, state-sponsored discrimination and terror. All of this is combined, and I think the way we look at history, unfortunately, is that we kind of bifurcate it. It's slavery one day, it's Jim Crow the next, and that is not accurate. Jim Crow is no right to vote, housing, no right to sit on the jury, no right to go to the school that you want to go to, no right to live in the neighborhood that you want to go to. All of this continues. You say, well, then we had civil rights, but even with civil rights, we created affirmative action to try to do something about it. That was immediately fought against. The Voting Rights Act is immediately fought against. When we started talking about the war on poverty, that was immediately fought against. All of this is state-sponsored. These are not just people. When we talk about the drug war that I'm very passionate about, this was a president who was informed by his own committee that you should decriminalize marijuana, but instead decided it would be more political, the state, to go after African Americans as far as marijuana is concerned. And then when we start talking about the difference between crack and powder cocaine, and you can say that was Joe Biden, fine, but it was 100-to-1 policy decision, a policy decision by the state to destroy African Americans. Environmental racism, there have been studies after study through the government showing that it is state action which causes environmental racism. Healthcare, state action which deprives African Americans of healthcare. Private prisons, which actually puts African Americans to work in prison while others are not allowed to work. So, Mr. President, I can't cheapen this bill. I will not vote for a bill that has occupations in there, because any bill that does that cheapens the legacy of our country, our state, and of every African American. And it's not just a legacy, it's what exists today. So if you believe that God put us here today, as I do, then we got to make the right choice on this. But I can't do it. I cannot do it. It's not about ancestry, it's about basic humanity. And Mr. President, I would point out on May 29th, and you can look up the tweet, I said bold, I tweeted out bold and interesting ideas by our Lieutenant Governor, because that is after you said you wanted to have the most important hate crimes bill in the United States. And I tweeted out, the only Democrat, while other Democrats were tweeting out, oh, he's not serious, oh, this is a conspiracy. Bold and interesting ideas. And here we are going backwards. And I will not do it. As much respect as I have for any occupation, I will not do it. It cheapens why we are here. It cheapens the history, the current history, what we're facing. And I cannot and will not participate in that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from the 34th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate, I rise once again to say happy Juneteenth. And to my colleagues who have already said all of that they've said, I echo it. But I want to shout out to the Clayton County Young Dems who have texted me and said they are on Freedom Park right now to stand together, unify. These young people are out here making a difference that the civil rights movement started. They are declaring they are going to finish it. They are not going to stop marching until we do something that makes a difference in this great state of Georgia. My shout out to the Clayton County Dems. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Thank you, Senator. The chair recognizes the senator from the 35th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President, senators. I too stand for Juneteenth Celebration Day, so happy Juneteenth. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1st of 1863, and General Lee surrendered in April of 1865. Officially ending the United States Civil War. News of the Emancipation Proclamation and the end of slavery, however, did not reach Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, and California until June 19, 1865. Georgia did immediately recognize it, and the slaves were free. Thousands of former slaves flooded the streets in spontaneous celebration, rejoicing in the news of their long-awaited freedom. The 19th day of June has been observed as Juneteenth to commemorate the joyous events of June 19, 1865, and Juneteenth celebrations have occurred in states across this great nation. Juneteenth and similar Emancipation Day observances formally recognizing the abolition of slavery are now officially observed in numerous states, Washington, D.C., and internationally in countries of Africa, Asia, Europe, and South America. And just this week, Pennsylvania and Virginia and 8 other states have said that they will have executive orders to actually make Juneteenth a state celebration every year. Whereas Americans of all colors, creeds, cultures, religions, and countries of origin share in a common love and respect for freedom, as well as the determination to protect their rights of freedom through the democratic institutions by which the tenets of freedom are guaranteed and protected. The state of Georgia appropriately recognized this glorious event in marking at the end of slavery
and the beginning of freedom for so many who had wrongfully suffered in the state of and in the nation. And that was way back in '09, and then in 2011, when the senator from the 2nd, the senator from the 34th, and myself, the senator from the 35th, put in that recognition. So we were the first state to officially recognize Juneteenth. The members of the body at that time called it Juneteenth Celebration Day. And those who received that exorbitant news of their freedom, and as a memorial to all who suffered from the cruelties of slavery, and encouragement, ceremonies, celebrations, and other activities to be held at that time. At that time, also President Clinton officially apologized for slavery. We have a resolution now that is still alive and in committee to have Georgia as only one of the 4 states left who did not that did not apologize for slavery. So I hope that we can pass that. But anyway, National Juneteenth Observances Foundation is celebrating today with all of the United States and all of the world. Happy Juneteenth. I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 40th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I stand before you this morning wearing a mask. And I know that all of you who are wearing masks know that it's very uncomfortable, right? It's hot. You can't really get a good breath. And when you can't get good oxygen, you can't think well. And we really kind of need to think well when we're here. And when I put my glasses on, when I need to read a document, the glasses get all fogged up, right? Yep, I'm seeing some nodding heads. I say to you this morning, I am not wearing this mask to protect myself. In fact, it's a handmade mask. I made it myself. And it's made of a cotton fabric, and it has holes in it because it's a weave. And so what the science tells us is that if you cough around me and you're not wearing a mask, those particles can go through the fabric and I can still get sick. So I'm not wearing it for me. I'm wearing it to protect others, because what the science says is if I cough or sneeze, that it will stop the particles from moving beyond me and making you sick. However, every single time when I walk into this Capitol, I walk past a police officer. And then when I walk down the halls, I walk past them again. And I have never once seen in the 5 days since I've been back a law enforcement officer wearing a mask. None of them are wearing masks. To which I say, did I miss a press release? Did Dr. Fauci say that law enforcement officers are immune from COVID? I don't think so. Now, I want to walk into Capitol and feel like the law enforcement officers are there to protect me. Now, I know that's a privilege, because I know my seatmate, the senator from the 39th, can't ever feel that way. But when I walk in the Capitol and I have to walk past police officers who don't have masks on and are not social distancing, I don't feel safe. I feel uncomfortable. I feel threatened. I feel like they could share a disease with me that I could take home and then give to my elderly mother-in-law and make her die. That's upsetting to me. And I don't feel like I can talk to a person and have a relationship with a person at this Capitol who's not wearing a mask. And everything we do here at this Capitol is based on relationships. Now, most of the people sitting here now have masks on, and I appreciate that. But there are a couple of us right here in this chamber who have refused to wear a mask the entire time, and that makes me sad because I like to have conversations with those people, and I can't anymore because I have to protect myself, my family, and my mother-in-law. So I leave you with this question. Why aren't our law enforcement officers wearing masks? Because what that says to me when I come in and they're not, is that they are not there to protect the people they serve. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
We are going to move on to the consent calendar of privileged resolutions before you. Does any senator wish to remove a resolution from the consent calendar? The chair hears none. Is there objection to adoption of the resolutions on the consent calendar? The chair hears none, and the resolutions on the consent calendar are adopted. Are there any motions to withdraw and commit? Chair sees none. You have a consent calendar of local bills before you. Mr. Secretary, are there any objections filed to any bill on the local consent calendar?
Mr. President, there are no objections filed.
Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the Committee on State and Local Government Operations, which is favorable to the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar? Chair hears none, and the report of the committee is agreed to. Questions on the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar? All those in favor will vote yea, opposed nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. Senators, please make your way to the chamber to vote your machine. Senators, please make your way to the floor and vote your machine. We still have a few folks who have not voted yet. Have all senators voted? Have all senators voted? Is the hallway clear? Oh, we got one more coming. Oh, two more. Oh, a couple more coming. All right. You waited to my last call. All right, have all senators voted? Mr. Secretary, please lock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 50, the nays are 0. The bills on the local consent calendar, having received the requisite constitutional majority, are therefore passed. All right, we're now moving on to the rules calendar. Mr. Secretary, please read the caption of House Bill 793. 578. Just kidding. House Bill 578.
House Bill 578 by Representative Dempsey of the 13th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 2 of Title 49 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to the general provisions regarding the Department of Human Services so as to provide for the review of certain law enforcement conviction data with regard to persons seeking to become volunteers, interns, students, or employees. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Judiciary recommends this bill do pass. Senator Stone of the 23rd District, Chair. That completes the order.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 1st to speak to House Bill 578.
Thank you, Mr. President. I bring you House Bill 578. This is a department bill relating to updating the authorization for background checks. As you can imagine, the Department of Human Services deals with patients and clients that vulnerability and confidentiality is the utmost, whether it's HIPAA protected or so forth. That's basically what it does. It is already being used when people are being interviewed at the very end of their employment or potentially being hired for employment, and those are the two things it does. So it has to do with patient care, HIPAA protection, and then adding in the interns and students. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to enter questions.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 48th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the chairman yield?
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify, make sure I understand that at lines 17 and 18, when we are striking or a district or county health agency, you see those words, sir?
Yes.
Are those folks still covered in the background checks? It's just clearing up some wording here?
I don't think those are relevant to what they're asking now. This has to do with the contractors. They were updating that language, is my understanding.
Are those folks still subject to background checks, is my question.
Let's see. I think that is accurate. They're still subject to the background checks. It is another section. So it's contractors, through their contractors, if they provide direct patient care, treatment, or custodial responsibility, they are background checked.
Okay, so that does include the district or county health agency.
I think that's in another section, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You have no more questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against House Bill 578? The chair sees none. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none and the main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. All senators, please come to the chamber and vote your machine. We've still got a few that have not voted their machine. Have all senators voted? Oh, we got one coming in. I think y'all wait for me to say that. All right. Have all senators... All right, Mr. Secretary, please lock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 53, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Mr. Secretary, please read the caption of House Bill 966.
House Bill 966 by Senator Representative Burchett of the 176th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 6 of Title 12 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to forest resources and other plant life, so as to regulate the harvest and sale of palmetto berries, to provide for definitions, provide for legislative findings, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and the Environment offers the following amendment, or following substitute to House Bill 966. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 6 of Title 12 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to forest resources and other plant life so as to regulate the harvest and sale of palmetto berries. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair recognizes our good friend, the senator from the 7th, to speak to House Bill 966.
Thank you, Mr. President. Without getting into the details of why we're seeing this again, House Bill 966 is identical to Senate Bill 407, which all of you have already voted on regarding the stealing of palmetto berries and the issue we have in southeast Georgia. So I assume your vote would be the same, and I'd appreciate your support. If there are no questions, I yield the will, Mr. President.
You have no questions. Does any other senator wish to speak to House Bill 966? The chair sees none. Chair wants to remind the senator from the 7th to get his hair cut this weekend. It's starting to grow out. All right, the question's on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? Chair hears none, and the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none, the report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill by substitute? All those in favor will vote yea, opposed nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. All senators have voted. Mr. Secretary, please close the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 49, the nays are 4. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. We've received a message from the House. Mr. Secretary, will you please read the message?
Mr. President, the House has disagreed to the Senate substitute to the following bill of the House, House Bill 793 by Representative Ralston VII and others, a bill to be entitled an act to make and provide appropriations for the state fiscal year beginning July 1, 2020 and ending June 30, 2021.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 19th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate insist on its position, the substitute to House Bill 793.
Senator from the 19th has moved that the Senate insist on its substitute to House Bill 793. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and the Senate has insisted on its position. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of House Bill 987?
House Bill 987 by Representative Cooper, the 43rd, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 31 related to health so as to provide additional measures for the protection of elderly persons, to increase the maximum fines for violation of health care facilities, to provide for staffing, training, and financial stability requirements for certain personal care homes and assisted living communities, to provide for nursing services in assisted living communities, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Regulated Industries and Utilities recommends that this bill do pass by substitute. The committee's substitute is a bill to amend an act to amend Chapter 5 of Title 30 of Title 31 related to Disabled Adults and Elderly Persons Protection Act and the health, respectively, so as to provide additional measures for the protection of elderly persons, to prohibit retaliation against a person relating to a report that a disabled adult or elderly person is in need of protective services or has been the victim of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, to increase the maximum fines for a violation of health care facilities, to provide for staffing and training, financial stability requirements, and for other purposes. Mr. President, that completes the order.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 17th to speak to House Bill 987.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I bring to you House Bill 987. Sometimes one of the hardest decisions that a family has to make is when to enter a loved one into a senior care facility. In addition to trying to decide what type of facility is appropriate, no matter how much you're able to visit, you're placing someone you love, someone that may have spent their entire life caring for others, in the hands of someone you don't know. A couple years back, this body joined me in passing a bill that addressed the requirement of background checks for those working in long-term care facilities, and that was a great first step. Since that time, with the help of a series led by the AJC, we've heard horror stories about the lack of care in some of these senior care facilities and the lack of oversight and standards that we as a state have to protect against these few bad actors in the industry. With House Bill 987, legislators, interest groups such as the Georgia Council on Aging, the Governor's Office, our Department of Community Health, folks from the industry, and families that have been impacted by neglect have come together and crafted a bill that seeks to tackle this issue head on. This bill provides increased penalties against applicants and licensees that violate rules and laws enforced by the Department of Community Health. House Bill 987 also provides minimum staffing to patient ratios and training requirements for those working in personal care homes and assisted living communities, and ensures that the financial stability is properly assessed for these facilities moving forward. The bill also, for the first time, provides a certificate for memory care centers, which will provide the oversight needed for this industry that specializes in caring for those with Alzheimer's. With this oversight, minimum staff to patient ratio and staff training is also established for these memory care centers. With the establishment of these basic minimum standards, families can take comfort in knowing that these facilities have the proper amount of staff and the properly trained staff to provide the level of care that's needed and expected for some of the most vulnerable members of our society. In addition to addressing these matters centered around staffing, the Senate Regulated Industries and Utilities Committee added additional protections to address the impact that COVID-19 is having on personal care homes, assisted living communities, and nursing homes. The bill requires that residents and their representatives or legal surrogates get proper notification when COVID-19 is discovered within a facility. The bill also requires a maintaining of at least 7-day supply of masks, surgical gowns, eye protection, and gloves for residents and staff, and that proper testing for COVID continues taking place, and that a plan remains in place to address future pandemics like this that may occur. These protections will be in place beyond an emergency order by the governor. Finally, in the last sections of the bill, we rename and restructure the State Board of Nursing Home Administrators to the State Board of Long-Term Care Facility Administrators, and ensure this board has a proper makeup to properly oversee our long-term care facilities in the state. House Bill 987 is the right policy move in our state to make certain that families that have to place those that have spent their lives caring for others in the hands of people they don't know can rest a little easier at night, knowing these facilities can offer the care that's expected and deserved for our seniors. With that, Mr. President, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 6th for a question.
Will the senator yield?
Yes, ma'am.
A couple of things. So it looks like there was a change in terms of the effective date. So this will be effective upon once the governor signs it. Do you know if he intends to sign it immediately or?
I don't know, but I would assume it'll happen quickly, mainly because of those COVID protections that are in there.
Right. So will the senator yield? Just
Yes.
one question. With respect to that, if there is a violation of this statute, while the current governor's emergency order is in place, isn't it true that there would not be recourse for families? Because at this point in time, there is immunity offered to every provider in these care homes.
Well, there's still protections that are provided in the current law that Department of Community Health can enforce, but there also is an executive order that does have immunity built into it as well. So it really depends on the exact circumstances. But with this bill, we'll make sure moving forward that we have the protections under law we need.
So with respect to this, whatever causes of action or protections you're putting into place in terms of, elderly people in these homes and their families, no one would really be able to move forward under it with respect to any kind of private action until the governor's emergency order has been, goes away. I'm not even know what the word is.
Well, yeah, until it expires. Are you referring mainly to the COVID piece and not the staff ratio and the licensee pieces or all of it?
You're talking about the emergency or this?
No, your question about the part that you couldn't have a private action under until the emergency order expires. You're talking about the COVID part of the bill in particular? And once this becomes law, it will be the law upon his signature, as you said. So how that all works out in the timing, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the governor will renew that executive order or not. I'm not sure how that's going to play out. So I can't know until I know the timing of all that moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Just the honest answer.
Chair recognizes your seatmate, the senator from the 48th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator, for your good work on this bill. My question is, as a former federal prosecutor, if folks do not follow these guidelines, is there a way to prosecute violators?
As you would know, I think you have to go under one of our elder statutes we have in place, and this would be something that'd be violating a law separately that would be violated, which would obviously be, if you will, per se, violation of some of our elder laws too. So the simple answer is yes, you could use this to help have criminal charges against someone as well.
Great, great. Now, I assume also as a whistleblower attorney, there are mechanisms by which if I or another whistleblower attorney representing a whistleblower will be able to bring action as well.
That's correct, under Section 1.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator, are there any more questions? Chair sees none. You've got no more questions.
Thank you. I ask for favorable consideration of House Bill 987.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against House Bill 987? Chair sees none. The question is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? Chair hears none, and the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. The question's on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of the bill vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. All senators have voted. Mr. Secretary, please close the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 53, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. Raise your hand if you pushed the senator from the 7th's request to speak button. Chair recognizes the senator from the 20th.
Mr. President, I give notice pursuant to Senate Rule 7-1.10B that at the appropriate time I will move to agree to the House substitute to Senate Bill 188.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 188?
Senate Bill 188 by Senator Walker of the 20th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 33-7-14 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to reinsurance of risks so as to provide adequate regulation of reinsurers, to provide for the incorporation of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners Reinsurance Model Law into the Georgia Insurance Code. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Senator from the 20th has given notice that at the appropriate time he will move to agree to the House substitute to Senate Bill 188. So noted. All right, we're waiting for the House to send their response back to the budget, so it's just going to be a few minutes here. So we're going to stand at ease just for a few minutes to wait for the House to respond. I want to remind everybody that in the conference room there is lunch. A couple of y'all look a little hungry. I can see your teeth through the masks. We'll stand at ease for a few minutes. Thank you.